What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Old Eyes, New Glasses Fatherhood podcast series. We are really stoked today to be joined by a gentleman who I've known for a while now. He is a minister. We're representing pastors today, a community activist, all around just cool dude, good guy. Matt Smith is joining us this morning. Hey, Matt, how are you, man?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Brian. It's good to see you both.
Good to see you as well.
Good to see you
as well. And thank you for joining our series on fatherhood. It's been a blast so far, and we're really honored to have your presence with us today. I've been looking forward to this from a variety of reasons. But as we get started, if you could just kind of share with us, a little bit of background on yourself, as well as some information about your daughter, age, that kind of thing. Kind of just, as dads, we all beam when we talk about our children. And so if you could just kind of, share with everybody a little bit about that. And then I'm gonna turn this over to Avery and we'll get started.
Sounds great. Thanks, Brian. I guess first I should preface it with, like everybody else, I'm working at home. And so our daughter is in this room doing distance learning. Our pandemic dog is running around somewhere. And my partner, my wife, Sarah, is a family and community medicine doctor at UC Davis. So she just went to the hospital to do a delivery. So I want to preface it with, at any moment, she could come back in, Eleanor could come out, or the dog could invade, and we'll adapt as needed. So my name is Matt Smith, and I'm a United Methodist pastor living here in Sacramento, California. I grew up in the Midwest in a suburb of Kansas City called Liberty, and my family kind of moved around a little bit when I was younger. Sarah and I was in grad school in New York City. Sarah went to grad school in Minnesota, and we moved out here in 2003. Eleanor turned 11 in October. So we are now the parents of an 11-year-old. And she's doing distance learning with a public Montessori school here in Sacramento. And that's a little bit of just some of those details.
Yeah. And for the audience, as I sport and represent the Oakland A's here on this podcast, Matt is a huge Kansas City Royal fan. And so we've had some interesting discussions through the years, and particularly about the wild card game a couple of years ago, where the Royals broke and still have my heart shattered in pieces.
I still relive that one as much as I can. That was actually a dad moment for us, you guys. That was a dad moment. That was when that was the Royals' first time to be on the playoffs since the mid '80s. And so I flew out from Sacramento to Kansas City, and my dad and brother and I all sat together in the upper deck, the front row of the upper deck, like, if the stadium seats 40,000 people, it was like 39,500 dads and sons that were there at the game. So
Well, it's looking like you guys had your run for the next 2 decades.
Yeah, I think we're done for the next few decades.
Meantime, we get teased as A's fans, like every year it looks good and just disappointment. So Abe, I'll turn it over to you as a heartbroken A's fan. We're just hoping that one day you get a World Series.
Yeah, right. Well, I know for a fact that Matt relives this game constantly, because there's like 3 or 4 times a year where he'll bring it up. And it'll just be, I'll talk about sports and he's like, yeah, well, it's nothing like that 2014 wild card game. I'm like, dude, we weren't even talking about this.
It shows how seldom we in Kansas City get to celebrate. I shouldn't say that now with the football team. We're like in a new dynasty, but with baseball, the struggle is real.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always count on the football thing. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is going to keep you in business for a long time.
I think we might be. I think we might be there for a while. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead, Abe. You do your thing, man.
So I'll start off with this first question, Matt. And at the beginning of every single one of me and my dad's presentations and some of the keynotes and workshops that we give, one of our go-to questions for everybody in the audience is to ask them, who are you? And really, that's it's a reflective exercise, and it's a reflective question. And the goal of the question is to get people on that path of self-discovery, right? And so the question I have for you today to start off this episode is if I were to ask who you are as a father, how would you answer that question?
Wow. I guess I can't really situate myself as a parent outside of, obviously my own immediate context, but my own experience of being a child. So I think on some level, who I am as a parent is trying to kind of Resma Minicum has introduced me recently to this phrase. He calls it somatic abolitionism. So he talks about the ways like our bodies kind of hold in our bodies the trauma from generations past. And he's writing specifically about like white racism and how that impacts differently colored bodies in different ways. But I think this something similar is true about parenthood. Like I'm the child. My dad's name is Don, and so I think it goes back to, on a certain level, who I am is I'm trying to metabolize like the gifts and the trauma that I experienced from my own relationship with my father, as he was trying to metabolize his. And then I'm trying to do that in ways with our daughter that can be a little healthier and more healing for her maybe than what I experienced. And that's always every day is a little bit different and trying to figure that out. I move in the world with a lot of privilege. Like I said, my partner, Sarah, is a physician at UC Davis. So my parents embodied a lot more like traditional roles of like fatherhood, motherhood, in terms of my mom's a teacher. She's an educator. And so Sarah and I she's more of a primary breadwinner in our family in that way. And so like right now I'm the one working at home with Eleanor, who's here distance learning. And Sarah's the one that's on the front lines working with folks at the hospital. So on some level, those are some of the things that like first come up for me in terms of who I am as a dad.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Really interesting. It's interesting to hear you answer the question like that, because one of the things that we often talk about, and we talk about it in our signature keynote, 5 Keys to Strengthening Your Relationships. That's also the book that we wrote, and we talk about generational traumas and how you in the key of setting expectations, and this is what I've learned by listening to my dad and listening to other dads. How do you set expectations for yourself as a parent in order to set expectations on your children? But one of the things that gets brought up when we talk about setting expectations is, how do you work on, or how are you conscious about not passing on the generational traumas that your family has been exposed to? And my dad tells the story of his father who told him, he loved his dad, but he didn't like his dad. And so this would have been my great grandfather. Sure. And my grandfather told a story of, being abused by his dad, both physically, emotionally, verbally. And so it's been one of the things that I think about a lot now is the fact that the position that I'm in a position of privilege, because the work that my grandfather did 70 years ago, 60 years ago, is I'm a direct result or a direct reflection of the work that he put in to try to break away from some of those things that you kind of alluded to right there, which I think is very interesting to hear you answer the question in that manner. So that was really insightful. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I was thinking the very same thing, Matt, when you were talking, because I was thinking about my father and conversations I had, with my father when I became a father, right? When I would go to him to, try to figure this fatherhood thing out, right? Because obviously, we don't leave the hospital with any sort of a manual, how do you build this kid right? So, you kind of have to just try to rely on some of the resources that you have, but it is all about continuing, as you mentioned, to continue to do the work to kind of figure, as we go. But I really do dig the fact that, you talked about being the one that's kind of at home doing the homeschooling and all that. I think about that movie. You might remember Mr. Dad, I think it was. which was kind of a cute movie. But to follow up on Avery's question, one of the things, as I mentioned to everybody, that you're a pastor, and I was just curious, has your work as a pastor in any way, shape, and form influenced the approach that you take towards fatherhood?
Wow. I've been at this ministry thing for like 10, 11 years now. So it's almost, and I was starting out, we planted a church here in Sacramento. The very first gatherings were happening when Sarah was just first pregnant. And so in many ways, the church that we planted and our daughter like have grown up at the same time. And so those identities for me, being a parent and being a pastor are really, really tied together. I think on a certain level, like what it does is one of the gifts of being in ministry is I have the gift of and the opportunity to be in relationship with the shadow parts of so many different people and families around me. And so people who trust me enough to come into some of those spaces and to be more vulnerable with what's really going on behind closed doors. We have images of fatherhood or motherhood or parenthood. And certainly some of those images that we project don't always line up with what really happens in our homes. And so part of that for me is just the journey that I've had of accompanying other parents as they're trying to navigate that, whether that's young families struggling, like they have this image, once you have your child is 2, you have this image of how everything is going to be. And for so many families, the strains of parenthood coupled with the other strains around the world. So I just get to spend time with people in some of those real struggles. And so I'm sure that comes into how I approach parenthood with Eleanor. I mean, my own theology, like a lot of people have an image of God as like a strict father. Like for me, I think of God in much more of like a nurturing parent image. And so that image of how I understand God, I think at my best days is how I show up as a parent with our daughter, Eleanor. And it's a reminder to me that in as much as I desire to have the way I want to be as a parent show up and what actually happens, that's not always the case. And so I have my shortcomings in those ways, and to try to fall back and to learn from others and to give myself little moments of grace to come back to try to align up the way I'm actually parenting with how I hope to do that. That's some of what comes up for me.
Yeah. I get that. It's very interesting, Matt. One of the things as a dad, when Avery and Justin were younger, maybe Eleanor's age, when I would fall short as a father, I always had, it's nothing that I did. I think God gave me a little bit of discernment to just say, dude, you fell short. You need to acknowledge that, and you need to acknowledge it to them. And so I never failed in being able to go back to them and tell them that I was wrong about something, or that I was sorry about something, that, if I could do it over again, I would do it differently. And here's why. And I just think that, again, listening to you and listening to your answer, I think that's important for dads to understand, right? That, we can get caught up as men in this macho type of approach to everything. And, I think sometimes that we're not really benefiting our kids when we do that. Now, obviously, you're the father of a girl. I'm a father of 2 boys. I have friends who are fathers of both boys and girls who, just tell me all of the time, dude, you have no idea how different it is, right? The things that, you think you would go in on your daughter about, the way you deal with Avery and Justin, you wouldn't do it if you had a girl, right? And I have no way of knowing that. Obviously, I never had a girl, but I do think that it is important as dads that we take the time to be able to reflect on our actions and to see, you know, how we could be better moving forward. But I do think it's interesting that as a minister, as you're talking about dealing with other families and being led into some spaces that a lot of people normally can't get led into, I can just only imagine how circumstances pop up in your life, how you know, potentially pull on other things that you've kind of had to counsel people on or deal with, or you've seen. So that could be a real important aspect of into your parent. I get that. Cool. Yeah. Very good. Abe, I'll shoot it over to you, son.
Well, I kind of wanted to piggyback on what you just said, Pops, because throughout this series, as I listen to dads and as I listen to different perspectives, the question that often pops into my head, and either of you can answer if you'd like, or if you have a response to this, but you know, I'm thinking about how much of raising a child is like that gut instinct of like what's right or wrong, and then how much of it is pulling from situations or seeing what other people did or knowing how you were raised. And I'm sure it's like a culmination of a lot of things, but I've been thinking about that a lot, like, you know, for better or for worse. Like if you see something that some parents are doing, you're like, nah, I'm not going to do it that way. Or if you see some things that you haven't tried and you're like, wow, that was really good. That's just something that it's been striking me a lot listening to these conversations. Because like you said, Pops, there's no manual when it comes to raising a child.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is on some level, like the ways that my own, I mentioned it as we started, but like my mom took that more nurturing parent role, and she was the person that stepped away from work and was home with my brother and with me during childhood. And my dad's way of seeing fatherhood, I think, was and probably to some degree, it's this double edge for him. His way of seeing fatherhood was to provide for our family. So in some of those more traditional gendered roles. And that meant for him early on, as he was kind of climbing a corporate ladder, relates to Brian's story a little bit too. Like there were ways in which he was climbing a corporate ladder. And then for him, that rat race just didn't work. And he eventually kind of went out on his own and started his own business. So I would say, like, one of the things with my own dad was the way we connected growing up was through sports, and it was through baseball. So I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours with my dad playing baseball as a kid. And so a lot of the ways we interacted were around sports and kind of the strategy and the game and those things. He didn't have, I don't think, looking back, he didn't have modeled for him, and he wasn't really in a place to like enter into some of those more vulnerable conversations or to be in that space all the time. I think it hasn't been part of his own experience. And so I think for me, I want to honor and hold the ways in which sports kind of has been a connection point for us throughout our lives. But also I think there are ways that being kind of a primary way we saw, lens through which we saw each other, it always meant that the more tender or vulnerable conversations, we didn't really find healthy ways into those very often. And so part of that, I think, is for me, it's wondering together with Sarah and with other people in our lives about how is it that we want to show up as parents to our daughter, and like what is providing for means something very different, I think, to me for our daughter than it probably did to my dad. A lot of that's generational. A lot of that's like kind of Midwestern, like whiteness in terms of what counts as success. So I think all those things are kind of hitting into each other in some of those ways. I don't know. Instinctually, I don't know that we have. For me personally, Avery, like I don't think a lot about like instinctually how I show up as a parent. I think I'm always trying to untangle and unpack what it means to show up to accompany our daughter now as an 11-year-old. I don't know if that answers at all your question, but those are some of the things I was holding.
Yeah. I think that just hearing your thought process on it, I'm very curious to hear different people's thought processes, because and I think the last thing that you just said kind of that brings it all home, where you're saying you're kind of always learning and, trying to become a better version of the parent that you are. And so, it's just me sitting here as a 25-year-old with no kids. I have this envision of like, and maybe a lot of people do, but like, when I'm a dad, this is how I'm going to be. And I'm sure when those moments come, it's kind of, glass shattering, because you can't control how those situations take place. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So the next question that I have for you is, share a moment, or can you share a moment, or maybe an event or a circumstance or situation that helped make you the father that you are today? And obviously there's going to be numerous moments like that, but is there one that sticks out to you over this journey that you're just like, this has had a huge impact on me?
I mean, the initial thing that I think about with that question, Avery, is like the crowning, the moment when Eleanor is like born. Yeah. So like, I want to be like honest. And then from there, like Brian said early on, like there's no manual. You're figuring it out. I was the guy that Sarah's in the hospital. She has Eleanor, and then a couple days later, it's time you can go. And we had gotten the car seat like months in advance, right? So I'd been driving around our little Prius with a car seat in the back for a couple months, but I couldn't figure out how to get the car seat out of the back of the car. So it's October 19th. She was born on the 17th. It's October 19th. It's like Sacramento. So it's 100 degrees still.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm out there trying to pull the car seat out. I can't figure out what any of the levers mean. This is like before you could just Google it, search it up, as Eleanor said. So I'm like sweating bullets. And eventually I'm carrying not just the car seat, but the base. And I take it all into the hospital. I go up the elevator and I go to the nurse, like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, how in the world is anybody going to let me go home with this child? I can't even figure out how to use the car seat. And so I brought it in and I confessed to the nurse, like, I don't even know how to do this. And so
that's
thankfully
classic.
Children are really resilient. And so, so thankfully children are really, really resilient, and we keep finding our way in that. So on some level, that's like the circumstance, but on other levels, what I would say is like, it's those moments right now as a kid where I'm trying to like do the hard work of going back through my relationship with my dad and to figure out like what parts of that were loving and what parts of that were we really missing each other, and how do we heal some of those pieces of who we are and how we are, because I think those are like, just as you named earlier, Avery, like that stuff is just like imprinted into our bodies in ways that when we're not intentional or conscious, those less healthy parts or ways of being like slip out really fast. And so you think a lot as you're waiting for the child to be born. You have these like 9 months, right, to prepare.
Yeah.
But most of parenting is you don't even have like 9 seconds to figure out how to respond to whatever situation's arising. So we kind of go to our default, and how do we stay as healthy as we can to not let that default be a destructive place, but to hopefully it'll be more healing and nurturing for me. So those are some of my wonderings. So that's my advice now for young parents. Like, figure out how to practice getting the car seat in and out before you go into labor. These are the details.
Yeah.
I'm sitting up there envisioning you like trying to get this car seat being straightened out, saying, "Okay, man, you got to get better than this, man. This is just starting."
Brian, I am like cursing the car seat. I'm sweating bullets. I can't figure out. I'm like, if anybody is watching me right now, they're like, what is wrong with that guy? And the last thing they're going to want to do is let me be going home with a child. Yes. Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that the moment of birth definitely does kind of just like that is the default moment, right? It's just kind of like, okay, like this is real now. Like we've been knowing that this is coming, and now this is definitely real. You know,
ready or not.
You know, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier that you have a brother. And now your brother's your only sibling, right?
Yes, he's 5 years younger than I am. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I had one brother who was 3.5 years older than me. It's so funny because, you know, we used to always say when Avery and Justin were younger, it's like, golly, my grandmother used to say, golly, they remind me so much of you and Mark, you know, just the two of them, right? And so my question for you is this just kind of just came to me. You have one daughter, but you grew up with a sibling.
Yeah.
Do you, I don't know what you and Sarah's plans are, if you plan on ever having another child, but did it ever enter into your mind that like, I want Eleanor to have a sibling because I had a sibling and I just thought it was good for me. I don't know how many siblings Sarah has, if any. But it's really interesting. The reason I bring that up, Matt, is because, you know, Lynette and I got pregnant with Avery at 5 years into our marriage. So we had an opportunity to we traveled a little bit, you know, we got to get to know each other, even though we knew each other for a long time prior to that. Obviously you get married, that's you're going next level with some things. So we had Avery and then 22 months later, you know, here comes Justin, not planned at all. Right. Yeah. And it ended up being, for me as a dad, actually one of the the best things could have ever happened, because they were so close in age that they you know, they just became like homies, right? You know, growing up together. So that was kind of cool to me because I had that. You had that. Do you parent differently? Not that you would know because you don't have more than one child, but do you think having a one child is kind of a different type of parenting that goes along, knowing how it was for you to have a sibling when you grew up? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our own story is my brother's name is Tyler. He's 5 years younger. And on some level, like, I don't know what it was like, Avery, for you and Justin, but we're 5 years apart. And for us, it was like Tecmo Super Bowl and then all kinds of sports that would usually end in like knockdown, drag out brawls through much of childhood. And we have a really great relationship now, but that took a lot of like work. And so I think on a certain level, especially the way my parents navigated being parents to us, my mom took more of the like lead role in that, and my dad kind of gave way to her in a lot of different ways. Some of that because he was traveling or with work and things, and others I think just because she's trained as an educator. So I think I loved having a brother. I still do. I think it's an amazing gift. Sarah was an only child. Okay. And so when we were together, we met in college and didn't get married for a number of years after that. And then Eleanor was born, I guess when we were in our young 30s. So we had been together for like 10 or 12 years at that point. Our image was that we would have more than one child. And so we never really set out thinking, we'll have only Eleanor. For us, it was more just like the reality of pregnancy loss. So Sarah was pregnant at least 3 different times where she miscarried. 2 of those were like Christmas Eve nights. So as a pastor, you're doing all this and in those spaces, and we don't really talk about those kind of things very often. But so for us, it was some of those discernment places where you have this image, like Avery named, like I'm going to be this kind of a dad. I think there were spoken, but then there were spoken conversations about a desire to have 2 children or more children. But for us, it was there's a lot of, even beneath the spoken conversations, there's kind of the unconscious expectations. Mm-hmm. Like for me, it was just a sense that, most things in life had kind of gone as planned in those ways. Yeah. And so you don't really, those are things you can't control. Mm-hmm. And so Eleanor is a very, very nurturing kid. So her image of like, there's her, I can remember like her like list to Santa, like multiple years when she's younger, would be like, I want to have a baby sister. She didn't want a brother, but she was very interested in having a younger sister. So that was for sure part of like her longing. And then it was like, as parents, how do you talk about that with your kid? Mm-hmm. And what are like age appropriate ways to name like the realities of like loss and grief around that, and and then how we are. So we don't anticipate having more kids, but and I think what on one level I think it means that our daughter grows up a lot faster, in the sense that especially in pandemic, the primary people she's around are adults. And so she doesn't have some of those kid relationships that built in. My brother and his family are back in the Midwest. And so a lot of the, in our particular situation, I think Eleanor has been around adults in ways that probably a lot of kids get to be around kids more than she is, which I think it's a double edge. But that's a little bit of our story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna throw this to you, Abe. I'm gonna leave you with this, Matt. Lynette's youngest sister is 17 years younger than she is. So
you never know. A reminder, you can't control this. Exactly. That's actually good. That's good, Brian. Thank you for that.
I just thought I'd share that with you.
Yep.
to that portion of the question. But anyway.
That is true.
Yeah,
True that.
Yeah. I only have one more question, Avery. I'll toss it over to you if you have something that came to mind.
Well, Matt, you kind of actually, jokingly acknowledge like your advice to young parents is to make sure that you know how to get the car seat out of the car. And so that was kind of my question. That was going to be my last question was, aside from the car seat, if there is anything else that is extremely important to know, if you could give, a young father, young parent, one piece of advice that you just think is surpasses all other things, just when it comes to raising kids and becoming a father. Is there any one thing that you could pass on that you think should be stated?
Oh, there's our dog gonna weigh in on that for us.
It's quite all right. It's all right.
On cue. Sarah's coming home from doing a delivery, and Aronime is greeting her. I don't pretend to have some amazing advice for a young expecting parent. What I guess I would name is surround yourself with people that are parenting in the ways that you would hope to do that, and let them be your people, and have honest and real conversations with them about the struggles of that and the gifts and the opportunities in that. And do your work of whether that's with for me, spiritual direction, or with a therapist, or do your work of metabolizing your own experience of being parented. Because if we don't do that work, I don't think we can really, in healthy ways, do the work of parenting. And so That's what I would say. And that's like hard, lifelong work.
Yeah.
I love that answer because, we've asked that question to every dad that we've talked to, and all of the answers are they're kind of the same, but slightly different. Right. Mm-hmm. And, I dig that. That's one of the reasons I can't wait to speak to, the younger dad that we're going to be talking to, right? Because it's just kind of like, like the perspective on I can't imagine, Matt. Avery was 31. I mean, I was 31 when Avery was born. So, I can't imagine being 23. I'm still trying to figure me out, right? But I was trying to really figure me out at that time. And so I can't imagine. Well, I just want to kind of wrap us up here with one final question. And it's really apropos because of the times that we're living here. And the question is kind of dealing with what we've been dealing with as a world in 2020. And now as we bleed over to 2021, which is this pandemic and with this COVID-19 virus. And, even though I have two grown sons and some of the other dads that we've talked to, they have grown children. And you have, as you said, an 11-year-old. This pandemic has still had an impact on me as a dad. So my question to you is, has the pandemic affected you as a father, as your role as a father to Eleanor? Has this pandemic done anything differently to you as a dad than, say, 2019 when we were living like in normal times?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. On some level, I think it'll be clearer as we hopefully down the road transition out of this, like ways that, because what I wonder about is, this is like a church example, right, Brian? But one of the things they say, looking back, the church did very little to innovate over like the last 70 years. Mm-hmm. And then like from March 12th until like March 30th, that was like the most innovation that ever happened in the church over like a 70-year period. And then people settled back in and got into a new rhythm and kept doing that. And so I think on some, like, I do wonder what will stay with us from this pandemic in terms of like our own family systems and ways. In our particular situation, like Sarah's a physician, so she's most of the time she's going to the clinic or the hospital most days, and Eleanor has been distance learning the entire time, and so it's given us just a lot more time together here. I think our rhythms in terms of the way we're making and sharing meals together have a better pace now, I think is fair to say. And honestly, the lack of being around other people, I think means that oftentimes we're functioning at our less healthier selves. Yeah. And so we're not only together in those spaces with some of those beautiful rhythms, but we're also not always at our healthiest. And so, so those tensions can be there in challenging ways for all of us. I think, for me personally, I would say some of the ways that it's opened up. Just one, I'm with Eleanor in terms of her class and school so much more than I was when in those early years. And I think one of the things my dad identifies regretting the most, and one of the things that he would say in terms of wisdom that he would want to pass down is center or prioritize your family more than you did your work. And that came out of his own kind of, what I would say is like, I think it's fair, he would say too, like workaholism, that kind of way. And so pandemic in a certain level shut some of those things down. And then I'm not sure how. I think that's why I said I wonder what we'll be able to take from it, because I don't know if we'll just go right back into our workaholic ways. But I think that's part of it. And I would also say, just to name two the obvious is that with racial unrest and racial uprisings in the midst, tied in with pandemic, it's also given the context for our family to have just much more intentional conversations about like, what does it look like to disrupt whiteness, and what does it look like to be part of creating a just and loving community. Like this morning, I got a Facebook post from our very first music director of the church. His name's Anthony Coleman, and he lives down in New Orleans now. Anthony's son is a month older than Eleanor. And so they grew up those first like couple years together. And so he posted this sweet little picture of them 9 years ago hugging each other. And so like this summer is also this reminder that like we moved through this. Anthony is Black and his son is Black and Cuban. And so it's this sense of like, there's just so much for us. There's a good reason to stay home and to work on this stuff, because we've got a lot of stuff to work on and to heal and to find more loving and just ways of being. So all of those things are swimming in terms of what's going on right now. Yeah,
that's deep. That's really, really deep. And thank you for that, because having an 11-year-old, that perspective is totally different than me, right?
Yep.
I'm at this place, Matt, in my experience has been more probably getting on their nerves because they're grown, but I'm still like, my instinct as a dad is like, yo, man, you got to tighten up that hygiene thing. You can't slip on that. You make sure that you're, being cognizant of the social distance. Just because you can go out and eat doesn't mean you need to go.
So you should. Yeah.
Right. All those things that are kind of like, and they're kind of saying like, okay, dude, like I'm 23 and I'm 25 now. And like you did all of that work. Like when we were growing up, like, why do you think that we haven't gotten it? And it's not necessarily that I don't think that they've gotten it. It's just the dad in me. Right. Sure. That's just, like this kind of an emergency situation going on. And then that dad never leaves. Right. So it's been.
Yeah. And thankfully, Brian, at 11, like developmentally, we're still at the place where for the most part, Eleanor is like where Sarah and I are, that is where she is.
Yeah.
So we are not living yet into that resistant, rebellious, I am identifying myself beyond this relationship. We are still kind of, I think, probably moving toward the end of that.
You are getting there.
So I'm gonna just stay in it while I can.
There it is. There it is.
And then we'll adapt and learn as that next phase comes.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm gonna just make this one last comment, and then Avery, I'll let you just close us out here. It's so funny that you just said that thing, Matt, about that resistance thing, because I remember Avery and I having a conversation probably a couple of times, but he was kind of pushing back on some things, or how come you're not letting me do certain things, or my friends are able to do this and do that, so forth and so on. And I remember saying to him, Avery, I'll just ask you, do you remember what my comment to you was when you were younger? Do you remember what I would say to you?
Well, let me preface this by saying, Matt, I think I told you this yesterday on the call that I this was going to come up because we were talking yesterday on our work meeting, and Matt brought something up about Eleanor. I'm like, I think you're going to really enjoy sharing stories with my dad because it really reminded me of the things that my dad used to say. And I think what you're getting at, Pops, in this specific example is, it's not that you didn't trust me, is that you didn't trust the people around me. Or it's and then the other thing that I would remember you saying when it came to like me not being able to do certain things, or even my own cousins being able to listen to explicit music or watch movies while we were really young, and you had told me later on as I got older, you said that you were trying to keep me young for as long as possible. And so I think those two things, now that I'm of this age and I just have a better understanding of where you were coming from. But yeah, those two things specifically, I think that's what you were referring to.
Absolutely. You grow up fast enough, man. Just know your role is coming. Just enjoy this, bro. Because when the adult
Yep.
gets here, it's it's a many new challenges that come with that. But at any rate, Matt, let me just say this before I turn it over to Avery. Thank you very much, man. I've enjoyed this. This was cool. This was good, and I think it's a good perspective on a whole lot of things. So we're honored that you take the time to hang out with us a little bit. Thank you very much.
Same. Thank you, Brian.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Abe.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for checking out another episode of the Old Eyes, New Glasses Fatherhood series. Be sure to hit that subscribe button below to see all of our latest videos, or check out some of our best clips.